March 1969, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. For weeks, the intelligence officers of the 5th Marine Regiment had been picking through captured documents, orders scribbled on rice paper, movement logs soaked by monsoon rain, half-burned notebooks taken from abandoned Viet Cong camps. Most of it was routine, times, coordinates, supply lists, the kind of handwriting that told you nothing except the enemy had been there and was probably still close. But in one thin, dirt-stained folder, analysts found something they'd never seen before. A warning. Not about American artillery. Not about B-152 strikes. Not about helicopter assaults or armored cavalry. It was a warning about one man, a single U.S. Marine. The document didn't list his name because the Viet Cong didn't know it. Instead, they wrote a phrase reserved for the kind of threat that doesn't obey rules, doesn't make noise, and doesn't fight like the others. They called him the White Feather. But among the rank and file, the whispers were far less poetic. They called him Uncair, the Boogeyman, the American ghost you never tried to ambush, because no one ever saw him first. To understand why hardened jungle fighters, men who had survived years of guerrilla warfare, feared a single enemy more than the entire U.S. Battalions, you have to go back to the hills west of Da Nang to a dusty Marine outpost known simply as Hill 55. Hill 55 was a place where the war never slept. Every night, the ridgelines around it lit up like camera flashes, mortar tubes firing in the dark, flare ships dragging light across the jungle canopy, and the rattle of AKs probing the perimeter. It was a battlefield where sound ruled everything. Footsteps in the brush, a twig snapping, a distant cough. Noise kept you alive or got you killed. But there was one Marine who didn't belong to that world of noise. He moved through the same jungles, breathed the same humid, mosquito-thick air, but left behind no trace. No footprints that weren't washed away by the morning dew. No broken branches, no cigarette smell. No whispers over the radio. Carlos Norman Hathcock II, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, fought a different kind of war. A personal war, a silent war. A war of patience, inches, and breath control. And the Viet Cong had learned that when he was in the area, nothing was safe. 10 miles southwest of Hill 55, deep in a stretch of elephant grass that swallowed light even at noon, a VC scout once froze mid-step. Not because he'd seen an enemy, not because he'd heard a sound, but because the forest had gone wrong. Too still, too quiet. No cicadas, no rustling leaves. No rhythm of the jungle. To anyone else, it was just silence. To him, it meant something else. The White Feather is here. His officers told him it was superstition, panicked imagination, American propaganda, but then another scout went missing. Then a courier, then a political officer, each killed with a single round. No wasted bullets, no gunshot echo. Just a sudden, precise end delivered from distances the Viet Cong couldn't fathom. The fear didn't come from the body count. It came from the fact that no one ever found the shooter. No footprints leading in or out. No empty brass. No broken twigs. No scent on the wind. Just a corpse and a direction no one could determine. Veteran guerrillas men who had fought the French and survived ambushes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail began refusing night patrols around Hill 55. Some insisted on taking wide detours, even if it meant adding hours to their march. Others simply avoided the area entirely. By 1968, certain VC units had developed their own unofficial standing order. Do not engage. Do not pursue. If the American Ghost is operating, leave the area. They didn't fear Marine rifle companies. They didn't fear helicopters. They didn't fear artillery. But they feared the man with the white feather tucked in his hatband because they never knew where he was, how long he had been watching, or who he had already chosen as the next target. To the Marines who served with him, Hathcock was a legend. To his commanders, he was a strategic weapon, worth more than a platoon. But to the Viet Cong who walked the trails of Quang Nam and Quang Tri, he was something different. A presence, an omen, a shadow with no name. And long before they ever learned who he really was, they had already given him a title he would carry for the rest of the war. The Boogeyman. Before he was the White Feather, before the Viet Cong whispered his name like a curse, Carlos Hathcock was just a quiet kid from Arkansas. Lean, quiet, and obsessed with two things: shooting and hunting. He didn't grow up with luxury. His family was poor, rural poor. His first rifle was a battered .22. He used to hunt squirrels, rabbits, and anything that could put meat on the table. But even then, there was something in the way he shot: deliberate, precise, patient. He didn't fire unless he was sure. And when he did, he never missed. That instinct to wait defined him. As a boy, he'd sit still for hours in the woods, letting the prey come to him. Not because someone taught him, but because he understood something most never learn: the forest talks. You just have to shut up long enough to listen. By the time he joined the Marine Corps at 17, Hathcock already had the makings of a world-class marksman. The Corps just gave him a uniform and a bigger rifle. He dominated the shooting competitions, won the prestigious Wimbledon Cup at Camp Perry with a bolt-action .30-06. Not flashy, just lethal. Instructors noticed. Officers took notes. But war didn't care about trophies. When Vietnam heated up, Hathcock volunteered. Not because he wanted medals, not because he wanted to kill. He just wanted to make a difference. Assigned to the 1st Marine Division in Da Nang, Hathcock was stationed at Hill 55, the beating heart of USMC sniper operations in the region. From there, the Marines ran dozens of sniper teams into the surrounding hills, rivers, and rice paddies. But Carlos wasn't just another rifle on a roster. He was different. He carried an M40 sniper rifle, a Remington 700, with an unearthed scope and a mindset forged in the forests of Arkansas. He didn't talk much, he didn't brag, but when Hathcock went out on a mission, people paid attention. He began racking up confirmed kills. VC officers, NVA scouts, radio operators, couriers, each taken with a single shot. Each drop of the trigger deliberate, measured, and final. But what made him terrifying wasn't the body count. It was the way he got there. Carlos wouldn't just lie in wait for the enemy to walk by. He hunted. His favorite tactic was called a crawl stalk. He'd move on his belly for hours, sometimes entire days, across open terrain, down creeks, through thorn thickets, all to get within the perfect range of a single high-value target. He'd inch forward, stopping every few seconds to scan for movement. Breathe, wait, move again. He once stalked a general for 4 straight days, crawling through heat, insects, and tangled brush, eating nothing, drinking only from puddles. At one point, he was just yards away from an NVA patrol who never spotted him. He waited until dawn, adjusted the windage, and fired 1 round through the general's chest. Then he turned, crawled out the same way he came in, and vanished. No one ever found the shell casing. No one ever saw him leave. Word began to spread, both among the Americans and among their enemies. The man with the white feather in his boonie hat, a small symbol he wore as a dare to the enemy, was untouchable. The feather wasn't vanity, it was bait. He wanted them to try to come for him, and some did. The North Vietnamese army reportedly assigned a dedicated sniper team just to hunt him. They studied his patterns, mapped his likely routes, tried to lure him into traps. It didn't work. He moved differently, thought differently, anticipated their moves before they made them. While they searched for him with brute force, Hathcock was already somewhere else watching, waiting, deciding. Marines in the field began telling ghost stories around the fire. You see a guy in a bush that shouldn't be moving, don't fire. Hathcock's out there, let him do his thing. He shot a guy through the scope once. Dead center. He's not human, man. He's the jungle. To the men who marched, bled, and died in that war, Hathcock was more than a sniper. He was reassurance that someone out there saw the enemy before the enemy saw them. That even in the darkness, someone had their back from 800 yards away. But to the Viet Cong, that same knowledge felt like a curse. Because if the jungle went quiet, if the birds stopped chirping, if the wind died, then maybe, just maybe, the white feather was watching. And you'd never know it until it was already too late. By early 1968, one truth had settled deep into the minds of the Viet Cong operating around Da Nang. You couldn't ambush a man you couldn't find. Most American patrols telegraphed their presence long before they arrived, boots slapping mud, gear clanking, radios hissing, young Marines whispering in the dark when they were supposed to be silent. It wasn't incompetence. It was the nature of big armies moving through a hostile jungle. But Hathcock wasn't an army. He was a rumor with a rifle. And rumors don't leave footprints. For months, Viet Cong commanders attempted to predict his routes. They studied maps, intercepted Marine radio traffic, even set up decoy patrols hoping to draw him into a kill zone. But none of it worked, because Hathcock didn't move like the Americans they were used to fighting. He didn't follow trails. He didn't repeat patterns. He didn't use the same firing positions twice. To find him, you needed tracks. Hathcock left none. You needed sound. Hathcock made none. You needed light, movement, or a mistake. Hathcock gave you nothing. One captured VC scout put it best during interrogation: we could not ambush him, because before we finished setting the ambush, he was already behind us. That wasn't bravado, that was fear. The kind that creeps into your bones when you realize the jungle is watching you back. The reason was simple. Hathcock didn't stalk from where the enemy expected. He stalked from where nature allowed. If that meant crawling through a swamp so thick with leeches the mud sucked at his chest, he did it. If it meant moving an inch at a time through thickets of dry bamboo that cut skin like razors, he did it. If it meant lying underwater with only a handful of reeds to breathe through, he did that too. He once said, "You move slow enough, the jungle forgives you. Move too fast and it tells your secrets." The Viet Cong had no answer for a man who treated the battlefield like a living organism, one he could blend into, calm, and manipulate. To counter him, VC units started deploying counter-sniper teams, pairs of seasoned guerrillas trained to operate quietly, using the same stealth tactics Americans had learned from fighting in the Pacific 2 decades earlier. But even those elite teams couldn't hook him. In one incident, a VC sniper team spent 2 full days shadowing what they believed was Hathcock's trail. All they found were impressions in the grass too faint to judge the direction, too subtle to prove anything. When they thought they finally had him pinned in a narrow draw, they opened fire on what looked like a sniper hide. It was a patch of vines. And by the time they realized it, Hathcock had circled behind them. 2 shots, 2 bodies, 2 men who never even saw him. It wasn't just skill. It was his mind. Hathcock saw ambush not as a place, but as a sequence. He could stand at the edge of a trail, feel the wind, listen to the insects, study the angle of the sun, and picture exactly how the enemy would attempt to kill him, and then he simply didn't go there. Other Marines said it looked like instinct, but it was something deeper. Pattern recognition honed through thousands of hours in the woods back home. He didn't need drones, radios, or satellites. He had experience and patience. Where most men saw jungle, Hathcock saw clues: bent twigs, a patch of grass brushed the wrong way, a bird call that didn't repeat. He once turned around an entire stalk because a spider web ahead of him wasn't broken. The VC never accounted for a man who hunted them the way they hunted the French 20 years earlier. To them, jungles were home. To Hathcock, jungles were an ally. By mid-1968, VC units began leaving warning symbols on trees. Avoid this valley. White feather operating. Imagine that. An entire guerrilla network advising its fighters not to engage a single soldier. Not because he carried a heavy weapon, not because he commanded men, not because he had American technology behind him, but because no one could predict him, hear him, or catch him. And worst of all, they never knew when he was already watching, because by the time they realized the jungle had gone quiet, it was too late. A young Marine radio operator shot clean through the heart on perimeter patrol. No warning, no sound, just one sharp crack followed by silence. The kind of silence that said this wasn't random, then another body, and another. Within a week, 4 Marines were dead, all killed from extreme range, all with single perfect shots to the vital area's throat, chest, or eye socket. No shell casings, no visible shooter, no follow-up fire, just the unmistakable signature of a professional. Someone out there was stalking Americans with the same precision and patience Hathcock himself was known for. Except this time, he wasn't a hunter. Hill 55 went on lockdown. Recon teams swept the ridgelines. Spotters scanned treetops, gullies, dry creek beds, but they found nothing. Whoever was out there wasn't just good. He was deliberately taunting them, working in Hathcock's own backyard, picking off Marines like a ghost in the fog. Then came the moment that changed everything. A young private walked into Hathcock's tent and said, half joking, "Looks like you've got competition, Gunny. Some VC out there trying to be the next white feather." Hathcock didn't laugh. He just nodded once, then picked up his rifle. Then I'll have to go meet him. What followed was one of the most chilling duels in the history of modern sniping. A battle fought with no direct line of sight, no words exchanged, and no backup. Just two men, two rifles, and the jungle in between. Hathcock and his spotter hiked out at dawn, cutting into an area known for thick elephant grass and dry knolls, ideal sniper territory. No one spoke. They moved slow, scanning every bush, every shimmer of glass, every unnatural shape. After hours of nothing, they paused near a ridge that overlooked an old French trail. A glint caught Hathcock's eye, just for a second. Not a scope flash. Something smaller, sharper, focused. A feeling crawled over his skin. He's watching us. Hathcock whispered to his spotter to freeze. They slid into cover, glassing the trail ahead, trying to see what the other man already knew. They were being hunted. For 2 days, the two snipers circled each other. Neither fired. Each waited for the other to make a mistake. Hathcock later said he could feel the other sniper out there. Not hear, not see, feel. The air was tense, electric, like two predators moving in the same direction, sensing one another's breath before the bullet ever leaves the chamber. Then, just before dusk on the third day it happened, Hathcock caught another shimmer. This time he didn't hesitate. He took a breath, calmed his heart, adjusted the unertl scope, and fired. One round, 7.6, 2 millimeters, straight into a tiny flash of glass. The bullet didn't just hit the enemy sniper. It went straight through his scope and into his eye, dead before his body hit the ground. When Hathcock and his team reached the site, what they found stunned them. The VC sniper's rifle was still aimed downrange. The scope shattered, his eye socket obliterated. It was a shot so improbable, so surgically precise, that some Marines didn't believe it was real until they saw the evidence with their own eyes. The round went right through the man's own glass, Hathcock told reporters years later. It wasn't luck, it was knowing where he'd be and being a second faster. In that moment, Carlos Hathcock did something few snipers ever achieve. He killed a man who was trying to kill him using the exact same skill set. And in doing so, he shattered the myth of invulnerability surrounding the VC sniper teams. From that day forward, Hill 55 was quiet. The kills stopped, the pressure lifted, and the Whisper campaign turned. The enemy had sent one of their best to kill the White Feather, and he'd come back in a body bag. But for Hathcock, it wasn't a victory he celebrated. It was necessary. He didn't relish killing. He didn't keep souvenirs. He didn't tell war stories at the bar. He simply packed up, cleaned his rifle, and went back out again because there was always someone else watching. Always another Marine who needed cover. And deep in the jungle, where sunlight barely touched the ground, the Viet Cong kept whispering, "Onker is still out there. Don't go looking for him. He'll find you first." Not every sniper leaves a trail of bodies. Carlos Hathcock did. But what separated him wasn't the number of kills, it was the weight of each one. Every shot was a decision. Every trigger pull was personal. Because to Hathcock, a bullet wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a message. "I never pulled the trigger unless I had to," he once said. But when I did, it meant something. They called it one shot, one kill. Not just a motto, it was a mindset. You wait, you breathe, you calculate, and then you make it count. He wasn't out there spraying bullets from cover like some adrenaline junkie. He was the opposite. A ghost with steel nerves. A man who would spend 3 days in a sniper hide just to take one clean shot. And more often than not, that one shot changed something big. There was the time he took out a Vietnamese general with a round from nearly 700 yards through an open window in a moving vehicle. The general had been moving between outposts at random, changing routes daily to avoid detection. American intelligence had been trying to intercept him for months. So they sent Carlos, no backup, no extraction team, just him, his rifle, and 3 days of belly crawling through brush and swamp so thick he had to tape his sleeve shut to keep leeches out. He found the kill zone at dawn, waited behind a broken stone wall, unmoving, barely breathing. Then an open-top staff car rolled into view. The moment the general leaned forward to speak to his driver, Hathcock fired. One shot, straight through the collarbone. Instant drop. The car veered off the road. Chaos followed. But by the time the VC realized what had happened, Hathcock was already gone. Another time, in a different province, he was asked to stop a courier suspected of transporting battle plans between NVA units. No one had ever seen the man, only that he moved fast, never used trails, and never traveled the same route twice. So again, they called Hathcock. This time, Carlos studied patterns, not people. Where the leaves had been disturbed, where the birds always went quiet at a certain hour, where the moonlight created a gap in the tree line. He picked a spot, a narrow draw with ankle-deep water and no good cover. That's where the courier would have to cross. He waited and waited for 36 hours. Then, just before first light, a figure appeared, light footsteps, pack slung tight, no weapon visible, just moving, fast and quiet. One shot, center mass. The courier crumpled into the stream bed. Inside his pack, hand-drawn maps, movement timetables, and a list of VC officers. It changed the outcome of 2 battalion-level operations. Carlos never bragged about those kills. In fact, he hated the word kill. He called it doing a job that had to be done. And it wore on him. Every time he squeezed that trigger, it chipped away at something inside. He knew that, accepted it, but he never let it change the mission. I wasn't fighting people, he said. I was fighting what they could do to my Marines. That's why every bullet had a name. Even when he wasn't deployed, Hathcock trained others, taught them to see the jungle like he did, to move like water, to shoot only when absolutely certain. He once told a student, if you have to shoot twice, you didn't plan right. That wasn't ego. It was respect for the rifle, for the jungle, and for the man on the other end of the scope. By 1969, Carlos had racked up 93 confirmed kills, but his fellow Marines estimate the real number was 3 to 4 times higher. The discrepancy wasn't due to lack of bodies. It was because Hathcock didn't care about records. If there was no official witness, no paperwork, no double confirmation, he let it go. Because it wasn't about numbers. It was about stopping the threat, saving a patrol, ending a war one shot at a time. He didn't fire to send a message, but the message was clear. If Hathcock's watching this valley, then someone's already dead. They just haven't hit the ground yet. Carlos Hathcock had become too dangerous to ignore. By mid-1969, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army had seen enough of their officers, radio men, and scouts drop dead with no warning, no sound, and no second shot to realize something had to be done. They didn't want to stop American snipers. They wanted to stop him. So they put out a bounty, $30,000, cash, for one man, dead or alive. To understand the size of that bounty, you have to understand the math. At the time, a Vietnamese farmer might earn $200 a year. Most VC bounties on regular Marines were $2,000 to $5,000. But Hathcock, 300,000 yuan. That wasn't a reward. That was a declaration. This man is costing us the war. The NVA assigned a specialized sniper hunter team comprised of elite sharpshooters, trackers, and close combat specialists trained to eliminate American snipers in the field. Their objective: find the white feather, end him, break the myth. The strategy was methodical. They set baits, created false courier runs, staged fake troop movements, even planted rumors in local villages hoping to lure Hathcock into a predictable position. They thought they understood him. They thought he'd take the bait. They forgot one thing. Carlos Hathcock didn't hunt like other men. He hunted the hunt itself. One morning, intelligence reached Tail 55 that an elite NVA sniper was operating in the jungle northwest of the base, near a dry riverbed commonly used by recon patrols. Carlos didn't hesitate. He packed his rifle, told his spotter, "Let's go meet him." For 2 days, they moved low and slow, cutting sign, watching the terrain like a living thing. No trail, no scent. But then something strange. A spider web across a gap in the brush, torn in the wrong direction. A rock shifted just slightly off its natural angle. A set of bird calls that didn't match the rhythm of the jungle. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. To Hathcock, it meant someone was hunting, and that someone was close. They set up a sniper hide near a ravine, a spot with a narrow sight line but perfect sound channeling. Carlos hunkered in, ghillie suit soaked with dew, breathing shallow, heart rate low. Hours passed. Then movement. Not much, just a shimmer. A faint flicker of metal in a patch of bamboo 400 yards away. Hathcock didn't flinch. He waited. The NVA sniper had spotted something too, just not what he thought. He began shifting into position, crawling forward. Carlos watched him inch forward, never knowing he was already in someone else's sights. "You want me?" Carlos would say later. "You'd better come get me faster than I can see you. Because once I see you," he squeezed the trigger. One shot. One thump. Then silence. It didn't stop there. Over the next month, 3 separate sniper hunter teams attempted to track and eliminate Hathcock. None returned. In one case, his spotter found an NVA sniper's rifle hidden under brush, abandoned. No blood, no body, just a trail of footprints that ended in a patch of disturbed grass. No one ever found the sniper. Carlos didn't confirm the kill, didn't even fire. The sniper panicked and ran. The psychological effect rippled through the NVA ranks. Intercepts revealed that junior VC units were refusing to patrol certain ridge lines known to be white feather territory. Some officers began removing white feathers from captured Marine helmets, fearing that wearing one could attract a bullet meant for someone else. One NVA battalion reportedly withdrew an entire scouting element after hearing a single suppressed rifle shot in the distance, convinced it meant Hathcock was nearby. But perhaps the most haunting moment came not from the battlefield, but from a letter intercepted from a captured courier. It was short, typed, "No signature. Do not attempt to kill the ghost. He is already dead. We just haven't found the body yet." Carlos Hathcock never took pleasure in being hunted, but he understood it. The moment he put on the white feather, he accepted what it meant. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a dare. "Come find me. Try it." And they did, over and over. But when the jungle went quiet, when the birds stopped singing, when the wind held its breath, they knew Onker was already watching. And you can't kill a ghost if you never see it coming. It started with an order quietly passed from S2 intelligence down to the sniper detachment at Hill 55. "We have a high-value target. Info a general. Location confirmed. No airstrike, no artillery, too close to civilians. This has to be surgical." And there was only one man for the job. Carlos Hathcock didn't blink. He just asked for a map, a weather report, and his rifle. The target was holed up in a fortified compound nestled inside enemy-held territory, ringed by 3 layers of security, anti-personnel mines, roving patrols, and thick jungle. It wasn't just risky. It was near suicidal. Even a 4-man recon team wouldn't have made it out alive. But Hathcock didn't want a team. He went alone. No backup. No radio contact. No one watching his 6. Just him, his M40, 10 rounds of ammo, a canteen, and a belly full of resolve. He was inserted under cover of darkness several kilometers from the objective. Then came the crawl. 3 nights. 4 days. Over 500 yards. Every inch earned by dragging his body through thorns, sand, fire ants, and broken ground. He moved slower than the wind. Slower than time. He didn't crawl. He flowed. He kept his body low, chin in the dirt, rifle across his forearms, eyes fixed forward. He ate nothing. Drank only when the dew settled on leaves. Relieved himself in place. Didn't scratch, didn't swat, didn't flinch not, even when a patrol passed within feet of his position. At one point, a bamboo viper slithered across his forearm. Venomous. Deadly. He didn't move. Just breathed. Let it pass. Because the moment he twitched, the mission was over. And he wasn't there to survive. He was there to succeed. Finally, on the 4th day, he reached the edge of the compound. His target emerged from a wooden hut with 2 escorts, surrounded by jungle cleared just enough to create a kill zone. Carlos sighted in, checked wind, checked distance, adjusted elevation, settled his cheek against the stock, slowed his heartbeat. "This is it," he later recalled. "This was the shot I came for." One trigger pull. Crack. The general dropped before his guards even heard the shot. The round passed clean through his chest and buried itself in the wall behind him. Instant K's erupted. Shouting, panic. Guards ran in all directions. Some fired blindly into the jungle. Others radioed in alarms. But there was nothing to find. Because Carlos Hathcock was already gone. He didn't run, didn't leave a trail. He backed out the same way he came in. crawled for another 2 days, completely alone, through a jungle now swarming with enemy patrols. By the time he was extracted, his face was cracked from dehydration, his uniform shredded, his skin crawling with bites and blisters. He had lost nearly 20 pounds. He said 2 words, "Target down," then passed out. The after-action report was brief. Mission success. HVT eliminated. No Marine casualties. But behind that clinical phrasing was a feat that became instant legend. Marine snipers still study that crawl, still walk it out during training, still shake their heads and say, "How the hell did he do it?" Because no one else ever has. What made it so incredible wasn't just the kill, it was the discipline, the patience, the refusal to quit. Hathcock didn't just kill an enemy general. He dismantled a chain of command. He demoralized an entire region. He sent a message. Nowhere is safe. And he did it without a team, without a drone, without a radio, just a rifle and the will to keep crawling when every cell in his body screamed for rest. When asked years later how he pulled it off, he didn't boast. He just said, "You stay low, you move slow, and you never stop." Because sometimes one man with the right shot is worth an entire army. By late 1969, something strange was happening in the jungle. Entire Viet Cong patrols were refusing to enter certain valleys. Porters were taking long detours through dangerous terrain, even under threat of airstrikes. Why? Because someone had heard, someone had seen, someone had felt the white feather. It didn't matter if Carlos Hathcock was actually there. All it took was a rumor, a broken twig, a patch of flattened grass, a second of silence in a jungle that should have been alive with birdsong, and suddenly nothing moved. That was his power. He didn't just take lives, he took space. He took initiative. He took the enemy's mind. In capture documents from VC units operating south of Da Nang, new standing orders began to appear. Avoid trail networks near Hill 55 during moonlight hours. Do not cross open fields without prior clearing fire. If signs of sniper activity appear, withdraw. Do not engage. These weren't responses to American battalions or airstrikes. These were instructions written for one man. The paranoia ran deep. One unit began sending out feeler patrols ahead of their main column, small groups of soldiers ordered to walk into potential kill zones to draw fire. When nothing happened, the main unit moved forward. But often, they moved too fast. And that's when Carlos struck. He once let 3 entire patrols pass just to wait for the courier in the middle. One shot, the man dropped. The others scattered like birds. They didn't even bother recovering the body. They left him, gear and all, because the second shot never came, and that was worse. The fear spread laterally. Villagers in VC-held zones began refusing to house fighters. "The Americans know everything," one elder reportedly said. "They have the ghost with the feather. He sees through trees. Whether true or not, it didn't matter. Belief is a weapon." And Hathcock had become a legend, so feared that entire sectors shut down just on whispers of his name. Marines on patrol began noticing it too. Squads would pass through areas once hot with ambushes and find nothing. Tracks led to nowhere. Caches abandoned. Even booby traps left unarmed. One corporal said, "It was like the jungle had ghosts, but they were running from ours." At Hill 55, recon units began using Hathcock's reputation as a tactic. They plant white feathers in empty sniper hides, scatter shell casings with his rifle's serial stamp, leave small carvings of ghost eyes on trees near VC trails. The goal wasn't to kill, it was to haunt, and it worked. An NVA defector later told US interrogators, "We thought you had many snipers, but then we realized it was always the same one." When asked what made Hathcock different, he didn't say his aim or his weapon. He said, "He never missed, and we never saw him." Hathcock's influence went beyond tactics. It affected timing, morale, supply chains, even unit discipline. Units started traveling only during daylight, making them easier targets for airstrikes. Others moved in large, loud groups, easier to detect by recon teams. Some began using civilians as human shields during movement. All of it because they feared what one man could do in the dark. Carlos didn't want to be feared. He wanted the war to end, but he knew that fear could save lives. Every patrol that turned back, Every supply run that got delayed, every ambush that never happened, meant one more Marine made it home. He once said, "I never liked killing, but if making them afraid of me meant they stopped shooting at my brothers, then I'd crawl through that jungle until my bones broke." And that's exactly what he did. Because for Carlos Hathcock, psychological warfare didn't require propaganda. All it took was a white feather in the wind, a convoy ambushed, a burning Amtrak, 4 Marines trapped inside, injured, dazed, running out of time. Hathcock wasn't assigned to the rescue team, but the moment he heard the call come over the radio, he grabbed his gear and ran. "They're my boys," he told the driver. "I'm not letting them burn." The vehicle was engulfed by flames when they arrived, its aluminum skin melting, ammunition cooking off in violent bursts. VC snipers were still in the tree line, picking off anyone who got too close. It was chaos. Smoke, screaming, the deafening roar of secondary explosions. And yet, Carlos ran toward it. No sniper rifle, no camouflage, just fireproof gloves, a sidearm, and raw determination. He made 4 trips each time, dragging a Marine from the inferno, shielding them with his own body as rounds cracked through the air. On the 5th trip, the engine block exploded. A fireball erupted, engulfing the left side of his body in liquid flame. Carlos didn't scream. He just fell back, rolled, and kept moving, dragging the last Marine behind him. Smoldering uniform and all, they called in a medevac. Hathcock refused to be airlifted first. "Get them out," he told the corpsman. "I'm fine." He wasn't. Over 40% of his body was burned, his face, arms, shoulders, and back seared down to raw nerve. The pain was beyond description. The skin bubbled, peeled, split open. His own sweat stung like acid. But he never lost consciousness, never cried out. He just gritted his teeth and said, "Don't tell my wife yet. I'm not dead." The medics didn't expect him to survive. Burn wounds that deep meant infection, sepsis, shock. Even if he lived, they said he'd never walk right again. Never hold a rifle, never shoot. They didn't know Carlos. Months of skin grafts followed, rehab, relearning how to move, sit, stand, even breathe without pain. But the fire hadn't just burned his body. It had burned away his war. His days in the jungle were over. The ghost was going home. But even in recovery, Hathcock never showed regret. Not once. He'd saved all 4 Marines. All of them lived. And that, he said, was the only mission that ever really counted. "I did what any Marine would have done," he told a reporter later. "I just happened to get there first." He never picked up the M40 again in combat. Never crawled through the jungle. Never watched another target through the scope. But the legend didn't die. It grew. Word of his final act spread through the Corps, then through the VC. And even in pain, even bandaged and broken, Carlos still terrified the enemy. One captured officer said he couldn't believe Hathcock was still alive. "We heard he had burned, but we also heard he had walked out of the fire." The nickname stuck. The man who walked through fire. But to the Marines who knew him best, he was still just Gunnery Sergeant Hathcock. And to the enemy, still on CAD. Because if the fire couldn't kill him, what chance did they have? In the years that followed, Hathcock didn't fade away. He helped build the USMC Scout Sniper School from the ground up, turning his pain into purpose. He taught patience, precision, respect. But most of all, he taught restraint. Anyone can shoot, he told his students, but a real sniper chooses when not to. He wasn't just shaping shooters. He was building men like himself, quiet, disciplined, lethal, only when absolutely necessary. Carlos Hathcock never fired another bullet in war, but his name still did. Long after he left Vietnam, his legacy stayed behind in the fear he'd carved into the jungle, in the soldiers who walked the trails a little slower, listened a little harder, and asked themselves, what if he's still out there? Carlos Hathcock never wrote a memoir. He didn't publish a book. He didn't tour TV studios. He never cashed in on the legend. Because for him, it wasn't a story. It was a duty. A life lived in the dirt, the sweat, the silence of the jungle, doing what had to be done so that others could go home. And when the war ended, he didn't ask for applause. He just went back to Camp Lejeune, picked up a training rifle, and started teaching the next generation. The USMC Scout Sniper School was still in its infancy. Standards were loose, tactics inconsistent. Hathcock changed that. He instilled the values he had carried into every mission. Discipline, patience, restraint, and purpose. He taught that a sniper wasn't just a shooter. A sniper was a decision maker, a shield, a guardian with a long-range conscience. You're not hunting men, he told his students. You're hunting moments, moments that change everything. His former students went on to serve in Beirut, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And in their hearts, Hathcock was always on the hill behind them. One Marine sniper put it simply, we all carry two things into combat: our rifle and the shadow of Carlos Hathcock. But the battlefield wasn't done with him. Years after the fire, his injuries caught up. Nerve damage, chronic pain, disability. In 1979, he was forced into medical retirement. Then came multiple sclerosis, the disease that finally slowed the man fire couldn't kill. By the end, he could barely move. But his mind? Sharp as ever. And his eyes? Still steady? Carlos Hathcock passed away on the 23rd of February 1999 at the age of 56. His funeral was small, quiet, just like him. No parades. No headlines. Just folded flags, salutes, and the hushed silence of men who knew what he had done, whether he talked about it or not. But the silence didn't last, because his story never really ended. It lived on in the training grounds of Quantico, in the windage adjustments whispered on distant hillsides, in the discipline of Marines crawling through the dirt, not for glory, but for the man beside them. And beyond the Corps, his name traveled much farther than he ever did. In post-war Vietnam, veterans of the VC and NVA still remember the name. They don't always recall the battles, or the dates, or even which unit they fought in, but they remember him. There was a man who moved like smoke, said one former NVA officer in a 2002 interview. He never spoke, never missed. He was not American. He was the jungle itself. Some still refuse to walk certain trails. Old soldiers in quiet towns, still wary of tall grass and sudden silence. Because once, a long time ago, they fought a ghost and never quite forgot it. In Marine culture, Carlos Hathcock became more than a sniper. He became a standard, a measuring stick for what it means to be calm under pressure, lethal without cruelty, and faithful without noise. One shot, one kill. It wasn't just his creed. It became the sniper's code. Today, his rifle is displayed at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. His white feather, preserved in glass. And yet, ask any Marine scout sniper what Carlos Hathcock really left behind, and they won't point to a relic. They'll point to the space between heartbeats, the breath before the trigger breaks, the stillness before action. Because that's where Hathcock lives. Not in the past, but in the pause, the patience, the quiet that comes before everything changes. He didn't need medals. He didn't want recognition. He didn't ask to be feared. But in the jungles of Vietnam, he earned something rarer than fame: respect. From enemies, from brothers, from history. And when they asked, what was he really like? His fellow Marines always gave the same answer. He was the last man you ever saw, and the first one we always remembered.